I mean, we have been in different situations in Anabaptist churches where we've been hurt, but if we really believe this, and we do, we're going to be in an Anabaptist church somewhere because our doctrine and our beliefs are Anabaptist. And so I think that's been part of the longevity of our journey, is that we have felt like we're going to make it work because this is what we believe.
Jeff and Deana, welcome to the Anabaptist Perspectives podcast. This is interesting. So I really enjoy getting people's stories on this podcast, and I know y'all have quite the story of different church backgrounds and religious settings, and it's we're going to capture some of that today and see if there's some lessons we can learn and pieces that I think will be helpful to our audience as well. So let me just start with the first question. Tell me about your religious upbringing. Were either of you all part of a church growing up?
I grew up Methodist, and I was probably there until we got married. And so I was sprinkled as an infant. And then in the 6th grade, I went through a confirmation class, and I'm pretty sure I heard the gospel there. And I was encouraged to read the Bible, so I started reading the Bible through in about the 6th grade. I feel like in my upbringing, it was nominal. I feel like it was a nominal Christian home. I have wonderful parents, and they were a blessing to me, but I think it was pretty much, for us as a family, a Sunday thing. I do remember feeling like as a child, I knew God and I knew Christ before I was saved, and had a true relationship as a child would. And I became saved in high school. I realized that I needed to ask God to save me through Christ. And as I said, I was Methodist until we got married, and then for a while.
Yeah. What about you, Deana?
I would have grown up Catholic, and I would have been baptized and sprinkled and confirmed and confessed and everything. And I'm very thankful. It was a good background. I appreciated the respect that I learned there. And I'm so thankful that my parents took us to church. When I would have gotten to be around college, my parents would have switched to a more of an evangelical background. And I would have delved into that a bit. And then before we were married, I would have I got a new job and moved to a new city, and I found a good church there. It was kind of like a Southern Baptist church, and I would have been baptized as an adult there. So we both would have grown up in Christian homes. I would have heard the gospel from my mother actually very clearly when I was, I think, about 7 years old.
Okay. So both of y'all so you're saying coming to faith, you said in high school, right? And then you'd have been maybe a little later, you're saying something like that?
26, something like that, yeah.
Okay. So when we had been talking before we had scheduled this, I was getting a little bit of y'all's story, and the piece that stuck out to me is it sounds like y'all spent a lot of time investigating different denominations or different church environments that you were part of. I'd like to hear some of that journey. I know that there's probably a lot of pieces there, so whatever you'd care to share. But one of the things with this podcast is we hear from a lot of people, from around the world, and a lot of them are on a journey. I'm trying to find a community to connect with, and I'm trying to figure out this church thing. How do I find like-minded believers? And that's a real challenge. That can be difficult. And so, what was y'all's experience with that process?
So I love the Methodist Church. I still have fond memories of it. I felt in college like the Methodist Church as a whole was embracing some things that I didn't think were biblical. I was not super pious. I think I'm still not super pious. There were just things that they were doing that I thought were, where I was at that point, like I said, unbiblical, and I was unsure of the direction. And so we got married in the Methodist Church, and were there for a few years after marriage, and it just didn't seem like, for us, a sustainable setting. And so we went to evangelical type of churches. I think we would have gone back and forth between Baptists and just evangelical, non-denom churches.
Mm.
And when I was getting my master's, in our background, everything's so much around our professions. In Dallas, we found an evangelical church in Dallas, Texas. I was going to Southern Methodist University to study music, and we became members there, and that was where I got my first believer's baptism. Was
okay.
there. And so we were really happy, I think, probably for 15 years after that in those kind of settings.
Mm-hmm.
We spent some time, quite a few years, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which we moved there for professional reasons in a GARB church. What is that? General Assembly of Regular Baptist Churches is what that was. And we loved it.
Yeah.
It was quite conservative, and it was a blessing,
Mm-hmm.
for us for that time. So,
So, Jeff, you're describing like these different parts of the journey and different places. It sounds like y'all moved around some. So, yeah, what was some of your journey through that process as well? Like, what were you experiencing in this time?
Well, first of all, it's like 7 years of stuff. And so I don't even know where to kind of start wading through it, but I'll try. I think we were homeschooling. And so part of it was, I remember we were reading one time about other cultures, and it was these people in Africa, I believe it was. Anyway, but they had put the things where their ears like hung down really low.
Oh, yeah.
And they had put all the beads and like stretched their necks and everything. And we appreciate that cultures, they're beautiful parts of all the different cultures. Anyway, but I thought something like, well, that's really barbaric, to do that, that's their culture. But, and then I realized, well, I've got metal hanging out of my ears and I've got necklaces and things. And I was like, well, and so just kind of like, honestly, just from that chapter we read in the social studies book, whatever, I just kind of started thinking about, well, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know. And it just started like in a lot of little ways like that. We were in church one Sunday, and an American flag and the rifles and those swords and guns and things came down, and we all sang Battle Hymn of the Republic, I think. And then a woman whose father was a veteran, and we're very thankful. We love our country. We're very thankful for all the sacrifices that people made. But there was everybody clapped for the veterans and whatever. And I just felt like I came to church to worship God. I didn't come here to worship my country. I'm very thankful for my country, but that's not why I'm in church. That was part of it. One of our dear friends, a couple of them actually got divorced and remarried. And again, we were searching the scriptures, asking our ministers, like, what's the doctrine with this? Because it just didn't seem right. And they ended up like coming to church with their other spouses, and it just seemed so mixed up and weird.
Oh, that does feel kind of bizarre.
So we were searching the scriptures and trying to figure out what does God's word say about this.
And if you could summarize through this process, what did you all feel like you were searching for?
I feel, to be totally honest, like maybe we weren't searching, that maybe God was leading. Many of these convictions, including the veiling that you didn't talk about, were, shamefully to me, Deana was having the convictions before I was. And so I don't feel like we were purposely saying we need to search for something. I feel like God was showing Deana things before me. And one of those things, the veiling, frustrated me. I wasn't convicted of it at all, but we would ask our people, and a lot of them were very educated. We were close to a high-profile seminary, and so they were very well versed in the scriptures. And I asked about the 1 Corinthians, talking about the veiling, and I got the answer about the prostitutes in Corinth, and they really couldn't say why we don't do it, except for that answer that it was a cultural thing back then. And I later found out that reason and that story about the prostitutes in Corinth actually is nowhere recorded in a secular way or in a historic way. Anyway, it's something that they said, and that frustrated me that they couldn't give a good answer, even though I wasn't there yet. So what do you think about searching? Were you searching?
One of our ministers one time said, like you were walking in all the light that you had. And I did feel that way, that whenever we would read something else or study something else and think, well, maybe we think this or whatever. I think that was, yeah, I wouldn't say we were necessarily searching. We were just kind of starting to feel like our beliefs aren't fitting in quite as well anymore. The more we learned and researched and studied, and
So maybe searching may not be quite the right word, but journey definitely seems like the word, right? Where you're, like you said, walking in what at least the light you have at the moment, and you're learning more, and you're asking questions and things. So through this process, so it sounds like there was a number of things happening to here. I mean, you're in various different churches. You mentioned some things that were painful and like, ooh, I'm not sure about that, and then the part on the head covering. At what point do the Anabaptists come into the picture here? Like, where did you hear about most? I mean, Amish or Mennonites, whatever. It's easy. I guess you can bump into that different places. But where did that enter the story?
I think at first, all we knew were Amish. Like, you'd seen pictures of them or books or something.
Sure.
And obviously it was a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And I think we looked at it one time, like not because of, we never thought we would ever be anything like this. And it was like, oh, they speak German. Well, we're out there, and, how could anybody ever go be a part of that? You have to learn a whole different language or whatever. And then it was like, oh, they drive horse and buggies, and Jeff's allergic to horses. So we can't.
so this was not going to be much of an option. Okay.
No. And I'm like, I can't live without air conditioning. But just out of curiosity. And honestly, it was like a vacation thing. Like, we had young children. There was nothing offensive. You can like whatever go. And I think we went down to Goshen we had an antique mall.
But to be fair to our people, I mean, we just did go down to Goshen, Indiana to look at the Amish. We get so frustrated now in Lancaster County when these people drive so slow and they want to look at the Amish. And we've seen comments on social media about how somebody saw an Amish person's laundry and how mystical that is. And so it really was us. And we love the Anabaptist and what it stands for, but we were totally those people that would go down to Indiana to look at Amish.
Kind of that almost like intrigued, touristy type.
Yeah.
Or as a curiosity, maybe.
Yeah. But I do think there was an attraction to something that was, to us, looked more biblical. Not as,
okay.
that they were doing things that we weren't. Why did they do them? And, what was the reasoning behind all of that? And again, not necessarily we were just searching. It was just like, well, what is this? And what is this? And feeling a little bit pushed out. Maybe we don't fit as well here anymore. Well, where would we fit? Just kind of looking around a little bit.
Again, kind of that journey of trying to find a place, a place to plug into, perhaps?
Not yet.
Not yet?
You have to tell them about the Homeschool Show.
A big part of our journey was we were homeschooling. Okay. And so through that, we came into contact with a lot of wonderful people. And so one of the band groups I was teaching, we had a homeschool band with like 1,000 people in it. Whoa. And we were performing at a homeschool convention thing. And so I was there, and I would always go look at the books and all that because I was homeschooling. But there was a family there, and they were selling harps. And I'd played harp some in college, but I did not own a big harp. So they had these smaller harps, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I could get one of those or whatever. So I picked up a little pamphlet thing. And honestly, I stuck it in a drawer for 5 years. It was just sitting there for 5 years.
Okay.
And again, we did this whole long process. So I think it was 5 years later, Jeff had decided that he was working at a school, spending a lot of hours. I was homeschooling 5 children. He was working 70, 80 hours a week. And we were like, this isn't, we have 2 different lifestyles, and we didn't want our family to be like that. We wanted to be closer. And so he resigned from his teaching position, and we moved to be with the family. We moved out of state just to be with our family and kind of regroup. And so when we were going through that process is when I decided I'm going to order a harp. So I pulled the thing out of the drawer after 5 years, and I ordered a harp. So we moved down there. And at that point, we were just visiting any kind of a church that we thought might work. We tried everything. I mean, we were
pretty convinced that it was in North Carolina. That's where I was born, and we had always wanted to live there. And we were sure we were going to find just this awesome Bible Belt Southern Baptist church with the children's ministries and great music. And so just to interject that, we were sure we were going to be able to be plugged in quickly with another church, of that brand.
that fit a little bit more where we were now with our convictions. And so we couldn't. And in the meantime, I called this family to tell them my harp wasn't quite ready yet, but it was almost ready. So I said, oh, well, hey, when you send it, please send it to this new address because we moved. And then the dad that made the harps or whatever said, well, you moved. Do you have a church down there? And I was like, no, like what on earth would he know about, he's 5 states away. And he just said, oh, I know of a church. I said, we're looking for something a little bit more conservative. We aren't really sure, and I didn't know what they were. I knew they had something on their heads, but I didn't know what they were.
We had seen a picture of the family and we were educated enough at this point. We were like, well, they're not Amish. And apparently they're not Mennonite either. And we were just like, so I don't know what they are. Yeah.
Anyway, so he said, oh, well, I know of a church. It was about an hour and a half away. And so Jeff called the minister, and he ended up actually calling back when Jeff was gone. So I had to talk to him. And I think I said something like, well, am I supposed to wear something? Because by then we were dressing a little different, and we were again closer to this end of things slowly. And he said, no, you just come as you are. And that was really, was just what we needed to hear. Like, just come as you are. We don't expect anything. And that was neat. So we went there. We visited. That would have been our first Anabaptist church.
That's the first time you actually went to a service, like a Mennonite or Anabaptist, whatever you want to call service. That's interesting because this is like a multi-year process then. It didn't happen super fast, I guess. Okay, so you go through that, and then at what are the things that started attracting you then, more specifically to the Anabaptists? Like you're on this journey, you're meeting some of these people, go visit this church. Yeah, speaking to that a bit, what were you seeing there that attracted you?
I mean, I think at that point, and even till now, what attracted us and attracts us, obviously there's always the lifestyle thing that our people from our background see. I mean, we just have to be honest, it is there. But in the end, it's the adherence to the scriptures to us was just awesome. We were trying to get answers in our former settings, and sometimes they had some, and sometimes, they didn't, like with the veiling. And it was so nice to be in a church where we could just sit down and ask questions, and they would give us answers, and the teachings were there. There were wonderful tracts that would go through all these doctrinal things, and that blessed us as well. We found out quickly that first Sunday we were there, we understood community in a way I think that we never did. So as soon as the church meeting was done, I was rather surrounded by men talking to me and being kind to me, and that really is a blessing. It's awkward when you visit a church, obviously, and nobody talks to you. And I thought, this is awesome. I don't know where my wife is in the church right now, in the church building. And I thought, if I go find my wife and the women are talking to her with the enthusiasm that the men are talking to me, then this might just have to be it. I mean, I was shocked. And so I went and found Deana, and sure enough, she was surrounded by women, and they were talking to her and welcoming her. And so that was a huge thing. So still to us today, the doctrine and the community that we have is such a blessing. And so we went home, and I honestly think we didn't talk much about the church for a week. I don't know why, because we talk about everything. And so at the end of a week, I think Deana brought it up. She said, what do you think, Jeff? And I said, we have to go back. And I said, what do you think? And she said, yeah, we have to go back. And so that was it. We were on the journey.
Wow. Yeah, the community aspect is an interesting piece you're pulling out there. That really stuck out to you then in that process.
There's nothing that I found. I don't want to overstate. Our experiences are our experiences, and I don't want to make it like we've lived everything. But in my experience, in our background, there's nothing like the community of the Anabaptist. I think the Amish have us all, just to be fair, on really, really, really close community. I teach singing to the Amish, and so we've gotten to rub shoulders with them, and I think they have us all. But all the rest of the Anabaptist groups, we still are so much closer than I felt like we were in our former background. I am a music teacher, and doing that, choir tours are just part of life. And this thing where we can call a church or multiple churches in multiple cities and say, we're bringing 60 people to your church. Will you host us? Will you feed us 3 times? And will you get housing for all of us? And the church usually to say, if they're not busy, of course we would, and make it work. That is the most amazing community. I had never seen anything like that until we were part of these settings. And so it just thrills me. And we still go to churches. Some are new to me and some are not, around the country. And for them to plan these things and be that welcoming, obviously to people that they do know some of them, because, a lot of our people are related even across state lines. But it just thrills me. And it is a huge deal.
So in this part of the story, then, you're starting to get connected more with the Anabaptist community. You're mentioning things like hospitality, I guess you could say, or that would be one way of describing it, that really stuck out to you. But what was the process itself like joining the Anabaptists? As you said, there was already years before you ever went to an Anabaptist church. That was starting, but then the joining process. What was that like?
I would say that because of the 7 years of just slow curiosity, reading, scripture, reading doctrine, studying everything, and again, not being set on, we're going to go be this. We had no idea we were going to be this. We were just looking for something that fit more with the doctrine that we were convicted of at that time. So that by the time we walked in the door of, again, just to visit this Anabaptist church that we'd heard about, I think I was probably 90, maybe 95% there. And you were about what?
63%.
I would say 75 or 80. But we had taken our time for so long and been looking for a place where we would fit in better with what we already believed, that it made it much easier as far as what we believed. Culturally, it was much harder. There were a lot of things that and it wasn't necessarily anything biblical, but just cultural things that we didn't understand or comprehend or have any framework for at all. That was really, like getting thrown into ice water or something in some ways. And we felt like we had so many things in common doctrinally, but yet culturally totally different. That was hard.
That's an important piece that I don't want to rush past. I'd like to drill into that a bit more, as much as y'all care to share. Like, I don't want to press on it too much, but the doctrinal alignment is one thing, but then there's the cultural element, and it's easy to kind of catch one or the other, but not really notice both, if you know what I mean. Like you were saying, how it's easy for people to, look at the Amish and kind of the Amish tourism, whatever that's kind of looking at the cultural side. Whoa, that's really interesting to do it this way. But then there's also the doctrinal side, and sometimes you have people attracted to one of those or the other, right? And so you're understanding, okay, so there's some doctrinal alignment, but then the cultural process is a lot. And I think it's important that we're honest about that, talk me through that process a bit, as much as you'd like to share.
So I don't think we realize, since we're all neighbors in the United States to some point, and in Canada, how much of a different culture it is socially than it is. And I mean, in so many ways, we look the same, besides dress things. And so there are lots of little innuendos. Is that the right term? And nuances socially that, we're still figuring out. I mean, I teach music to kindergarten through 12th grade. Sometimes I think that the 5-year-olds I teach understand their culture better than I do. And this is about our 19th year with the Anabaptists.
That's incredible.
And it's just tiny little things, some things are just some things that we would say, we'd be told, that's actually inappropriate. And I'd be like, wow, I feel so bad. And then sometimes, the Anabaptists would use a phrase, and I'd be like, oh, that's kind of irreverent. And it went both ways. And it's just frustrating, to be in your 30s and 40s and be learning things like that. And then, some of it's lighthearted. Like I remember the first time somebody said we're having haystacks, and I thought, okay, haystacks. And then I noticed that it looked sort of like Mexican food because Deana is from Texas, and we love good Mexican food. And so they put all of it in a pile, and I thought, oh, that's irreverent. and then they got the ranch dressing out and put it all over it, and I'm like, okay, this is wrong. And so I'm still not sure if it's supposed to be sort of Mexican or if it's just a meal with Mexican ingredients.
I don't know. I've honestly not figured it out either myself, but I've never thought of that before. That's actually kind of hilarious.
And so that's a funny way to look at, culture shock in a subtle way.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you use the phrase culture shock. Yeah. Is that kind of what it felt like?
Well, it was spurts of culture shock. It wasn't like suddenly, wow, because we had watched it.
I would say that they were very open and patient and answered our questions. They were very approachable. I wonder sometimes, are we approachable, enough? They were very approachable. They would answer our questions. They were very accepting of us. But yeah, I don't know why the food thing comes up, but the first time we went through the food line, whatever, I looked and I was like, oh, and I said, Jeff, they make their own little Debbies. And they were little whoopie pies like wrapped up. And I was like, oh, they make their own little Debbies. Like, so that, but again, those things have nothing to do with doctrine or anything biblical.
Sure.
They're funny and they're little quirks. And I think that was important for us, was to separate, I don't make little Debbies. Or I'm sorry, I don't make whoopie pies. But that has nothing to do with what I believe about these doctrinal issues. And I think that helped us a lot too, was just to appreciate the differences and just say, well, I didn't grow up like that. My mom didn't teach me how to make whoopie pies, but that doesn't mean I'm less of a homemaker or less of a Christian or something, because it's not a doctrinal issue.
But at the same time, the cultural element can result in a lot of confusion and disorientation, right?
It was huge. It was huge. It was very fresh. Like you said, especially we were in our 40s, 30s, 40s, and it was, you feel like by that point you've got a few things figured out, and then all of a sudden you think, maybe we don't.
Yeah. Again, just it feels, in my mind, the word that keeps coming up is disorienting. You live this portion of your life, and you're like, okay, kind of know how things work, and then suddenly you're in an environment where you keep getting hit with random surprises, where it's like, whoa. How did you work through that?
I think we get asked, not often, but enough, what can the Anabaptists do to make it so that all the people from our background will come into the churches and stay? And I think they want this list of horrible things that the Anabaptists are doing to offend the people from our background that they leave. And I think we've decided that there's nothing like that at all. It tends to be people who decide that it's just not worth the cost, for one thing. But for this specific conversation, there are misunderstandings, I think, that happen. The Anabaptists do have a social worldview, as do the non-Anabaptists. And so I think sometimes we mind read each other incorrectly. And since we're in an Anabaptist setting, their mind reading is going to be more valid to some point, because it's the predominating worldview of their church. And so we're the ones that can feel kind of silly, and be left out. And so I like animals. And so we had some friends, and they almost adopted us. They were so wonderful to us when we first came to the Anabaptists. And so I would just go out and pet their cow and talk to it. And they told me after a year or so, they said, we thought that you were not a Christian because you worshipped animals. And I was like,
oh,
okay.
Interesting.
Right. And so, they said he's to eat or whatever. And I probably said, don't eat him. And I mean, anyways. And so they're like, yeah. And so things like that, I just think, they're thinking, wow, this guy really is kind of messed up. He worships animals. And I was just like, I just like to pet animals anyways. So some things like that. Y'all looking at me like, that is kind of weird, Jeff. Well, anyways.
Well, but I think it's kind of like a fish in water doesn't realize there's water around it. Like that's how it is with the cultures that we live in. Sometimes it's immersive, and then when someone tries to break into that space, it can just be complicated. I guess is the word that comes to mind.
I think preconceived notions are really not helpful either. I know one time I sewed some dresses and I had taken home ec, I don't know, whatever, and I knew how to sew. Anyway, so I'd sewn some dresses for my daughters and we went to church the next day or whatever. And somebody said to me, "Oh, you have a new dress?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, who sewed it for you?" And I said, "I sewed them." And they were like, "Oh, you sew?" And it was like, yeah, like my mom sewed, my grandmother sewed. Like, what's the big deal? You can only sew if you're Anabaptist or something. So things like that.
Yeah,
I think we're a little like that. Because you want to fit in. Like from our standpoint, there are so many similarities. Doctrinally, we just want to feel a part of it. And I think when we felt singled out, like, oh, you're so different, we didn't necessarily, and we felt it some, but it was like, oh, thanks for drawing attention to the fact that that you think I'm really different and weird, even though on that issue I wasn't. That was kind of.
But I think it was misunderstandings. I don't think they meant it to be as hurtful as it was. I was at a brothers meeting once, and of lovely people, and we were talking about passing out turkeys at Thanksgiving to the community. It's just to be a blessing as a church. And one of the people said, "Well, do you think the people in the community will know how to cook the turkeys?" And I was just thinking, okay, you just said that in front of me. I came from North Carolina, and us hillbillies could make the most wonderful food in the world, and every one of us knows how to make a turkey. And so some things like that, it comes across as hurtful, but it wasn't really meant to be that way. And I don't think they thought I was even in the room as a non-Anabaptist background person. So there is that.
But it's so easy to just have these assumptions that just kind of happen. You know what I mean? And that's, I can see some of this as definitely a process, as y'all are entering this and trying to find your way. And I think back to some of the things you were saying, we all want to have a place. Like we want to feel like we belong somewhere. It feels like that's a theme that's coming through this episode, right? Is you're searching, you've been in these different church situations and you're trying to find, okay, where do we belong? Where can we join a community of believers where we feel like, we're a part, we fit here. And in a way, I think everybody's looking for that, So this is maybe backing up a little bit, but I want to make sure we catch this here. What were the main points that convinced you that you wanted to join the Anabaptists? We're hitting some of the cultural things, but it'd be interesting to catch some of the doctrinal elements as well.
I think it was, and I don't know when this became the defining point, but I feel like that in all the things that we've seen, and we haven't seen every situation, obviously, in the world, that the Anabaptist approach to Christianity is the most biblical. And that's not to run anyone down. I don't know what the underground church in China does. I have respect for it. I don't know what indigenous peoples do that are evangelized and come to Christ, but I feel like what I know of North American culture, it's the best example I've seen of listening to the teachings of the Bible and reading them and doing them, and more specific, the teachings of Christ and of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's hard for me to think, and I don't want to be arrogant and say, well, I will never leave. We're here by God's grace, and I hope that we will stay by God's grace. What is dear to us is, again, listening to the scriptures and saying it says to do this. So we're in a church that chooses to do those things. And the Anabaptists aren't perfect with every little thing that we do. I get that. But I've never seen any other group that really is this dedicated to the words of Christ and the commands of scriptures. And it would be hard to go back and say, we still have these beliefs. Well, I don't want to be negative or anything, and run anybody down. But I feel like this is the best example.
Yeah. What would you say?
That's it. I mean, we have been in different situations in Anabaptist churches where we've been hurt, but if we really believe this, and we do, we're going to be in an Anabaptist church somewhere because our doctrine and our beliefs are Anabaptist. And so I think that's been part of the longevity of our journey, is that we have felt like we're going to make it work because this is what we believe.
Well, and that's another thread too that's coming through, is perseverance, right? Is that capture it correctly?
Oh yeah.
Do you all want to say anything more on that point?
I think, to people that would be searching and considering, to consider it carefully and think about it for a long time, and to jump in and to do it in the end for obedience to God and Christ, even if the hurts come, because I want to do what God would have us to do, and maybe not be a fundamentalist, however, to obey Christ and his commands. And so, like Deana said, we have been hurt. And people would just do, and I feel like we feel it more since we don't always feel like we are in as a part of the culture. I think our children do. So, yeah, the perseverance for the sake of following Christ and being in a community of people that follow Christ.
Perseverance for the right reasons.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah, because there's so many bad reasons that people could do things. And I feel like for us, that was what ultimately, that's what mattered. That's more important than relationships or being misunderstood or whatever. It's our beliefs. So we had to, I remember one time we said, well, where else are we going to go? What are we going to do? We have to stick this out because we do believe what we believe. So
I think that the modest clothing and the separation is a big draw. I just don't think that would be enough for us to stay. And I think maybe that's why some people join for a while and then go away. And then the lifestyle as well. And along with us going to look at the Amish, we tried farming and a tiny bit of homesteading and starting businesses. And we failed at all of those.
We did, miserably.
We're unapologetically teachers, and it's what we absolutely love to do.
So you don't have a little garden and all the typical Mennonite things, and whatever.
I think I got 2 tomatoes this year.
We tried.
Well, I don't feel quite so bad because I'm like the worst gardener on the planet. So I just kind of given up hope that will ever happen. So, and we can kind of hot chuckle about it. But, like that's actually a thing. Like the Mennonites have their gardens and the whatever. And if someone's coming in and like, oh, okay, well, if this is like how we're supposed to do things and yet maybe you don't want to do it or don't enjoy it or something like that, could be unnecessary pressure that isn't really intentional. It just kind of happens. So as we pull this package together, what advice would you give to listeners that are on their own journey right now of trying to find what church should I plug into? How do I join a community that represents the things that I value and that I believe God is calling me to? And they're on that journey, whichever part of the process they may be in, because in your situation, it was quite a process, right? What do you say to those people? They're searching, and what advice would you give them?
I think that we should search for a church that we feel very comfortable in. And oftentimes our people come and they want to be extremely conservative. We want to be the most conservative Mennonite or Amish that we can. And we get frustrated with the churches that we find because we feel like they're not conservative enough. And so we want the churches to bend a little for us. And then I've also seen our people come and want to be fairly liberal. And so they go to a conservative church and they want it to be more liberal. Am I saying this right? And so I think it's important to find a church that is as close as your belief system, including culturally, for lack of a better term. Is it the right conservative or the right liberal amount for you? Because it is frustrating, because I feel like some of the well-meaning Anabaptist churches will try to make things a little bit more liberal, if that's what we are pushing for, because they want to keep us usually maybe not much more conservative. And so I would keep going if the churches are available in the communities where you are from. to try to find something that suits. And also, our people can be pretty cynical about the Anabaptist nuances and things. And I think hurts come into play. I think sometimes for a time when we come in for the first 4 or 5 years, we kind of feel, and it's not imposed on anyone, kind of self-imposed, like we don't have anything to contribute to the community. And so I feel like we replace that kind of not feeling valuable with some cynicism and Mennonite jokes. And so I would just avoid that. I mean, the Mennonites do some very charming things that can be teased about occasionally, but I just feel like, keep the cynicism at bay and see the beauty of the culture and the wonderful things.
I would say, first of all, and I think, again, what worked for us was that we already knew what we believed. We had read the Bible, we had studied. We weren't following any religion because we didn't even know it existed, really, or knew what it was. And certainly not the details about it. But as we grew spiritually, we just got to a point where, this is what we believe. And so we were looking for a group that believed that. And we certainly never thought it would be where we ended up when we started, for sure. But that way, if you go in and, maybe we'll do this, or, they do this, maybe we'll do this, and, we don't really believe this, but everybody else does it, so maybe we'll do it. That's not going to work. That's not going to last long term.
It's not sustainable.
No.
Yeah.
And I feel like, there are things, obviously, that we can, I hadn't thought about that before. That might be something really good to add in. But you have to really, or for us, we had to really know what we believed before, I think that helped so much. I had a friend, and her family was also from a non-Anabaptist background, but we were just talking one time, and she said that her mother would sit in church sometimes, and after church was over, all the ladies would, talk about whatever they were, and she said her mom didn't really feel like she fit in or had really, close friends, and but her mother had said, well, I might not completely fit in, ever really, or feel like I do, but my children will. And that was a sacrifice that she was willing to make, because her upbringing and background and education and everything was so different. But she was willing to do that because she felt like this will benefit my children. And I have felt like that sometimes. But I will say, in my church setting now, I feel accepted and appreciated for the person I am and whatever God's given me. And that's a good feeling. I haven't always felt that way, but I do really appreciate where we are now. So.
I think that's an important piece that you had there, that our churches, when I say our churches, I mean the Anabaptist community needs to be aware of, is this. And these are hard things to know what to do with, but it is so easy to miss things because of some of the cultural dynamics or different backgrounds. Sometimes there's gaps where we're missing each other in the communication, and I don't know what the solutions are to these things, But if hopefully we can at least put a little more awareness out there of this, maybe that will make people more gracious and more willing to learn from each other, perhaps. I don't even know, and perhaps you have something you want to add to that.
I was just going to say, I think maybe I'm wrong, but the men might have an easier time of it because they can talk about their jobs or, whatever. And I think sometimes for the women, there are bigger differences in some ways. I don't know. But I feel like I've been in situations where they all grew up together. They all went to school together.
Yeah.
They all, and I just felt like I'm so different. I only kind of merge in here, within the past 10 years or so. And so then I feel like I'm not going to interrupt and say, hey, let's talk about this that applies to me, And so, but I do really appreciate the women that have reached out to me. And I don't want to be a ministry project. I don't want that either. But I enjoy.
But not like ministry project, but as in like someone that reached out and cared about your life and just had interest in you and made an effort to include you. Is that a way of saying it, or? I
don't know, because I do not want to be a ministry project. I think Jeff and I have always felt like we do not want to be needy because sometimes people from our background can come in and they need this and they need that and they want that. It's like take. And Jeff and I never wanted to be like that. We wanted to give. We were frustrated that we couldn't give more. And so
Yeah.
I never wanted to feel like that. But it's nice when somebody includes you or something.
Being included, I think. Yeah. Kind of gives a sense of, oh, okay, I belong here, or I fit in here.
And to be honest with you, in the churches where we would talk about spiritual things, I felt a lot more, those conversations were easy to be a part of.
That's an interesting and I think important piece there. Yeah. Do you have something you'd like to add to what she was saying?
We didn't talk about it much, but there was not a crisis, but it was hard for us for 2 or 3 years because we really felt like we didn't have anything to give. And this is our perspective, not necessarily everybody that would come from the non-Mennonite background. We were musicians, we had taught high school bands, and instrumental music was a huge part of what we did. And so in our first Anabaptist church, I'm not sure if they actually were thinking what we thought they were thinking, again, on the mind reading. We thought you just didn't talk much about instruments and playing, and we had played classical music and other kinds of music. And so we really felt for a while like I don't want to say worthless, and we didn't want to appear needy. Like I said, we tried the gardening. I tried some construction and carpentry. It was kind of a fail. And so we just felt like we had nothing to give. And that particular setting that we were in was a homeschool only setting. And so there was not a Mennonite school there. And so it was pretty hard for us to feel included. And I do think that's one thing us as Mennonites could do when people come in is try hard. And I think a lot of the churches do. Once they're church members, especially, and get them involved in the serving the church and in the communities, helping them to be able to serve in different ways there. I remember once there was a fellowship meal, and we really hadn't been asked to do much. And a family we knew walked in, and they had the spoons and forks, the plasticware. And Deana said, "We haven't even been asked to provide the church with spoons and forks yet. We're really at the bottom of the totem pole." And so it's a blessing, anything we can do to get people, when they come in, involved. And we're so glad that we've been able to be for 10 or 12 years in communities where they have Mennonite schools, and we can serve that way, and we absolutely love it.
Because you're both teachers, right? Yeah.
Right.
So that part is neat, but again, that kind of that perseverance to kind of get through some of those hurdles, like that's hard. That's hard.
I wanted to say too that what he was saying about like figure out where they can fit in, not right away, obviously, but when they become members. Just what are their gifts? What are they comfortable contributing? What can they help with? And again, not as a ministry project. Well, they can't do anything else, so we'll let them bring the forks. But, figure out how to help people plug in using the gifts that God's given them.
I think again, I keep coming back to or thinking through this as a process for you all, right? And this is not something that happens overnight. It's not like you woke up one day and, found a book on the Amish and you're like, I want to be like that. And you join a Mennonite church next week or something. That isn't, it definitely sounds like that's not the vibe we're going for. And that these things take a long time. And I wonder if some of the challenge is perhaps we try to rush things a bit. I don't know. I could be way off. But it can be a bit easy to idealize things, and just think this is going to be fantastic and everything's going to be great and wonderful. And then suddenly the culture shock, as you said, is like the getting dunked in ice water or something. And you're like, whoa, I did not expect this. I don't know. And I could be wrong. Every story is different, but.
I think with us, it was almost the opposite. It was like, oh dear, look what our beliefs line up with. It wasn't like, oh yay, we're going to go play Little House on the Prairie. It was like, oh dear, now what do we do? Do we want to do this? This is, and that again, long term, that was a really good thing because we had to think about, is there anywhere else we fit in? Is this is what we believe? This is where we fit in the best. And that's why we took quite a while to, even once we'd set foot in an Anabaptist church, to think, oh dear, are we gonna really do this thing? And we took a long time and read a lot and studied a lot and prayed a lot. The other thing was that when we first walked in, I know one of the things we loved was the music. we just opened the door, and we were late, of course. People from our background are late. So we opened the door and we just heard this. We loved music all our lives. We met in a music group. We've been involved in music all our lives. We heard this beautiful 4-part sing. It was like, that is really neat. But there were some things we noticed the first time. Oh, look at that. Look at that. And we picked up very quickly that Anabaptists are not perfect. None of us are. Nobody is. But I think some people would always say to us in the beginning, like, oh, we're not perfect. And we'd be like, don't worry, we noticed, we picked that up in the first 5 minutes,
We can tell.
But again, that misconception that we think that you're perfect, like, no.
Okay. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah, this is quite the story. And I think hopefully the piece that people are taking out of this is the journey and the process, and going through, it takes time, and finding that place to plug in. What is that community of believers that you should be, I'm saying you, the audience, should join it. What is God calling each of us to? I think that's the question, and I'm sure there's a lot of variation depending on who it is and where they are. And that's the challenge. And I think you both had some pretty significant pieces to add as far as you have the doctrinal side, right? The beliefs, but then also the culture element too. And culture is very complex, and it's very hard to understand all the different dynamics, and it's so multifaceted and so forth. But hopefully there are some pieces here that some of the listeners look at. Oh yeah, okay, I should be aware of that. So as we bring this story to a close and tie the ribbons on the package, so to speak, what are any closing thoughts, words of advice you'd want to give to the listeners? Anything you want to leave us with?
I honestly don't think there's anything more important than serving God. He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And, I had a friend once that said, you know what, if I found a better way than this, I think I'd go. And I mean, I don't want to, that sounds trivial, but truly, I think we should be in churches and in communities where that's the goal, is to serve God through Christ and do what Christ says to do.
And I'd agree. We've just come back to that again and again. It's obedience. If we do love God, we'll obey Him, His word, in whatever way we feel is right.
And we found such joy in that and freedom.
Wow. Jeff, Deana, thanks for taking the time to come on today and share your story. I really appreciate the openness, and I feel like I learned a lot today. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode with Jeff and Deana. If you found this interesting, you'll enjoy the testimony that we recorded with Dean Taylor, which you can find that linked in the description down below. Consider joining our monthly partner program, which you can join for a monthly gift of any amount. You'll get access to an exclusive partners podcast as well as other bonus content. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.